I wasn't going to be here. So first up, we got apologies for absence. Any apologies?
Yes, Chair. I've got two. Sorry. I've got apologies from Councillor O'Boyle from Coventry and Councillor Clinton from Dudley.
Okay, we'll note those. Item 3 is declarations of interest. Just to remind members of the need to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests. Not seeing any hands going up on that one. Item 4 is Chair's remarks. I've got nothing specific to raise under that item, so I'll move straight to the minutes of the meeting on the 21st of December. First of all, are we happy with those as an accurate record of the meeting?
Agreed. Yeah.
Chair, I've just got one amendment,
Right.
which is quite ironic because I drafted the minutes, but bear with me. I had an email from an officer from Solihull Council just to say on page 3, the last paragraph, where I've noted their working model as wildlife waste project, it should just be
wildlife waste.
Wildlife waste.
Okay.
So it's just a very, very minor amendment that I will get sorted.
Fine.
That's right.
Okay. I don't think that's a deal breaker for signing off the minutes today. But thank you. Okay. There's no other matters on the minute. Sorry.
Yeah, Chair, on that same page, there were a couple of actions that fell out of that in relation to the second, it was, no, perhaps one, second paragraph. In response to Council Youth who queried the membership, a list would be sent to Council of the Environment and Energy Board of the name of local authority officers representing the 5 or 6 working groups across energy and environmental programmes. I don't remember seeing that.
I think that's on me. So we have circulated it to the net zero directors, but we can send them out with the minutes. So yeah, we can make sure that happens. I'll pick that up straight afterwards.
It said it would be sent to councillors.
Yeah, we'll send it with the notes from this. Sorry.
Okay.
Okay. So with that, let's move on to the first substantive item, which is the local nature recovery strategy.
I will pick that up. I will share my screen. Obligatory. Can everybody see that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so the local nature recovery strategy is a piece of work we have begun on here at the Western Midlands Combined Authority. I'd say over the last 6 months or so, it's been gearing up, coming for some time. And I'm going to give a little bit of a background and explanation as to why this piece of work is being carried out and what it's going to look like. So for some background information, the local nature recovery strategies are a new statutory duty required by law under the 2021 Environment Act. That's when they were introduced. And they are spatial strategies for nature and environmental improvement. So since the introduction of the Act, there's been some development, mainly coming from DEFRA and Natural England, as to how the local nature recovery strategies will be carried out. And that information has now kind of all come to the fore, and we're beginning on actually carrying out this piece of work. So the local nature recovery strategies are made up of 48 local nature recovery strategies, which cover all of England. So they're typically a county or combined authority scale. And for each of these 48 areas, a responsible authority has been assigned the statutory duty of carrying out this piece of work. So the West Midlands Combined Authority is one of those responsible authorities. It has a deadline for publishing of March 2025. So this is a piece of work that will be carried out intensely over the next year. And all the constituent authorities within our area, so our 7 constituent authorities, are defined in the Act as supporting authorities. So they have the right to be involved in the process and the obligation to get involved in the process. And that is something I'll say more about as we go through. So to really tell you a little bit about what the local nature recovery strategy is, as I said, they're a system of spatial strategies for nature and environmental improvement. And they're required by law, and they have 3 main minimum things they need to carry out. The first is to agree priorities for nature recovery. So this is really about bringing together key stakeholders all around the region to make agreements as to our priorities for nature recovery and potential measures for achieving that. It also must map the most valuable existing areas for nature. So these are areas that we're already managing and protecting for nature. So we can see what are we already protecting. And then based on our priorities for nature recovery, we're going to map out proposals for creating or improving habitat based on the priorities that we set. And this will be for achieving nature recovery, but also for creating wider environmental goals, such as using nature-based solutions to have other wider impacts. And this all must be achieved through extensive stakeholder engagement. So that means working really closely between the West Midlands Combined Authority and our constituent authorities, but also with other nature partners, with communities, with environmental organisations, to really make this a piece of work that's owned by everybody. In terms of how it will help us, I think it's really important to know how the local nature recovery strategy builds on what we're already doing. You know, it's easy to say, you know, we've been writing really good strategies for many years in the region. We've been implementing really good projects for nature in the region. So what really is new about the LNRS? The first thing to emphasize is that it's really hierarchical in its scope, in that it looks really regionally and makes us work together on things from a local to regional level, but then it builds up to this national level because all these 48 strategies will come together to form an England-wide nature recovery network. And that will be much more, you know, organized in its approach. It will show us how we can actually really reconnect habitats and natural areas in a really, really joined way that we've not done before as a country. It's really focused on actions and the data and evidence to support those actions. So what do we want to do? What are we going to do? What is beneficial for nature and for our communities? And what data and evidence do we need to put that together? So it's really a data and evidence piece of work, but also building on from that, what we could do. It's going to have more influence in planning through the LNRS. That's a really big piece of work. This statutory duty came in with biodiversity net gain. So it's almost, imagine like the roadmap that will tell us where it's most effective to use biodiversity net gain. That's what we're supposed to do in terms of our planning obligation. LNRS is where should we do it and what should we do? So it's laid out in the Environment Act that planning and local policy has to have regard to it. We're waiting on further information is exactly how that will look. But it means that nature will have a, you know, regard in the planning system that it's not had before with this and biodiversity net gain. And it will boost existing projects within the region, things that we're already doing. It will highlight them and help to support them. And it will also enable us to work at a new scale, which will create new paths for nature recovery. Until now, a lot of our nature recovery work has been focused on getting in a grant, using that grant to do a project, grant ends, project ends, how do we carry it forward? Whereas this is about leveraging new paths for financing it, whether it's, you know, BNG or private finance, and working at a scale that enables us to really have more long-term thinking in terms of nature recovery and not project by project based thinking. There'll be requirements for monitoring and updating. So it's not one strategy and that's it. It's a live strategy. We're expected to update it. I think a minimum of every 5 years, there'll be new duties that will come in requiring us to update it from government. So it will be a living strategy. And it'll be key to meeting our 25-year plan and environmental improvement plan. So it's got, you know, a lot of potential. It's just a starting point. It's going to be iterating over the years to come. And as I kind of touched upon, it's not just about nature recovery, because nature recovery is a pathway to many other kinds of support for our environment, for our communities. So we're going to be looking at air quality, flood risk, indexes of deprivation, and how we can address inequalities through nature recovery. Access to nature being, you know, one key example of that. Climate vulnerability, we know, is a massive issue. There are so many ways in which nature-based solutions can address all these issues, and also reverse species loss and restore habitats. So it really is a very comprehensive piece of work that will use nature to address many of these issues. And that means we need to engage with a wide range of stakeholders, not just our nature-based experts, but also people working in these fields. In terms of what we've been doing so far in the WMCA, we've been starting to progress on this project across 3 main sort of themes. Big one, as I mentioned, stakeholder engagement is really key to this, and that will be the backbone to our work. So we've been engaging very closely with officers from the constituent authorities. They're termed as statutory authorities in the Environment Act, so we often use that language as well. These are mainly our planning policy officers and environment and natural capital officers, but we're going to be broadening that out as well and talking to our local authorities in detail. We're also working closely with Natural England, who oversee the whole process, and the Environment Agency and Forestry Commission, who will also be key partners in this work. Working with our LNRS neighbours, as I said, we're making a network for recovery across England, which means we have to work closely with the authorities around us who are developing their own local nature recovery strategies, so Warwickshire, Worcestershire, Staffordshire, and we're also working on local nature partnerships, so bringing together our environment community, our nature community, to feed into this process. In terms of governance, we've established a local nature recovery strategy working group. So again, that has representation from all the constituent authorities, as well as from our local nature partnerships, and they'll be leading on the production of the LNRS, and we will be guiding it, but it will be a group effort. We're developing task and finish groups, which will work on specific activities in more detail. For example, blue infrastructure, people's well-being, climate adaptation, protected sites and habitats. These are some of the kind of more targeted pieces of work we'll be doing as part of the LNRS. And we're working very hard on data and evidence to make sure we've got that unified foundation of good data and evidence across the region that we need to create a good LNRS. And we're also doing research into how we can make sure that LNRS aligns with existing regional plans and policy, because the LNRS will not replace what everybody is doing locally. It will add to it, and it will create cohesion amongst them. In terms of a timeline, we're on a very tight timeline, because, as I said, the deadline is March 2025. It might be a bit hard to read some of the small text on the screen for those in the room. Apologies. Right now, we're doing a lot of data baselining, stakeholder engagement. Draft preparation for the LNRS will be taking place in the summer, and there'll be a period of time when it will sit with the local authorities and they'll have the opportunity to give feedback on it. There'll be a period of public consultation in the autumn, and there'll be time to then finalise the final piece of the LNRS in time for the March deadline. Finally, last slide in terms of next step. As I said, we're collaborating with the constituent authorities, their natural capital officers, to broaden our engagement within each authority to make sure we're talking to all the right people across floods, climate adaptation, public health, to get their inputs on the LNRS. We're working towards outcomes that complement and support existing local and regional priorities. So we're getting the views from our planning policy officers. You know, what are you already doing in terms of nature restoration and planning for nature, and how can we add to that and support it? And we're developing the links with this programme to our other programmes of work to make sure they can get the best out of them. So the local investment in natural capital scheme is a big one, because that is looking to increase the scale at which we can create projects, and the LNRS will map out an increased scale in what we can do in terms of nature recovery. So we're also making those links. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions?
Yes.
Any questions or comments from colleagues? Majid, later.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a few comments from me. Yeah, we have got an officer, Simon Needle, one of our best officers that we have in the council, who sits on the local nature recovery strategy group as the BCC representative, alongside colleagues from other constituents. The work that has been undertaken in partnership with Wildlife Trust, starting the nature improvement area, has transformed into our City of Nature 25-year nature recovery map. It's helped us immensely, and this mapping will form the base where we see our priorities for core ecological networks and opportunity areas. Over the last year, we've, I think, assessed up to 50 sites within this network, habitat mapped and assessed for ecological condition. And obviously that's going to be really valuable in the coming months. The other thing I would like to note is that in the paper, it says there's no immediate financial implication of this report. So whilst the combined authority does receive funding, there's no actual funding for officer support within BCC as well. So obviously, if there's any additional capacity, that we would have to cover that ourselves as the council, and that's the same for our partners across the combined authority as well. Thank you, Chair.
I think that's a good point. But mine's picking up on some of the words that you used in there and challenging them in a way. You said that it was hierarchical, and I've got to say it just seemed a bit top down. Should it be bottom up? And you've said it should be focused on actions, and if it's focused on actions, my feeling is if you're going to get things done, it's going to involve local groups at the bottom and generally volunteers and friends groups and what have you. And I don't see that in there apart from in the local nature partnership, if that's what it's involved. But I really do think that it's not involving the people that are expecting to be involved at the end. The other thing is, I don't see any public consultation in here whatsoever in the timeline. Surely at some stage during the involvement of any kind of strategy, there should be some public communication and consultation and feedback. And lastly, right at the very beginning, you showed a photo of the canal, and yet you've got some key people there: Natural England, Environment Agency, and Forestry Commission, but you haven't got the Canals and River Trust on there.
Can I come back on this?
Yeah,
please?
certainly.
Because so on the first point of the hierarchical, I kind of regret that word as soon as I said it because it doesn't get at the heart of what I mean. It doesn't mean that it's not going to involve bottom-up work. What I mean is that it's a strategy that looks at a regional level building up to a national level and feeds in from the local level. So I mean hierarchical in terms of the stages at which it looks, not that it's coming from a. That makes sense. In terms of how it will engage with local communities, it is in many levels a sort of high-level strategy that then feeds into other local things. But it will be engaging with local communities in that it will set out where things are already happening, where local communities are already doing things, and will support them in joining up those places. And as part of that, there will be public engagement. So on the timeline where it says consultation, that is a public consultation, and we'll be doing a large piece of consultation engagement work on that. And we are also planning to do public community consultation work in the feed, in the growing part of developing the LNRS, because there's no use consulting on just a final document. So we'll be looking to the citizens panel that we have to do some work with them on feeding into the strategy, and we'll probably be doing other small pieces of engagement work across the West Midlands to bring in local communities. We'll have to be quite careful in our scope because of the timeline as to how extensive that can be, but it certainly is not the intention that there won't be, local and community-based work for this.
This is where you'd expect the local authorities to do some of the legwork to feed in, and I think that's what should be in this report or part of that strategy, that it does cascade down even further. And you've said you'll be focusing on areas where people are actually carrying out action. It's going to be the areas where people are not already motivated to carry out any action, which is also important. There might be some really bad green spaces, and I think we've got a few of them in Sandwell where we need to focus on how we're going to change the ethos of that particular area. So I think that needs to be built in as well.
That's the balance, I think, of what's already happening, where things to be happening. Just very last on Canal and River Trust, they are very much involved. They are chairing the local nature partnership. They're just not mentioned on that slide because they're not one of the national bodies in terms of the DEFRA group, but they're very much involved. So
Okay, all right,
Yeah, sorry, I'm really sort of ready to points and hopefully, we've managed to answer those. And yes, we do want to engage at that bottom level because actually that's where a lot of the actions will happen. One of the things that's really critical with this, and I'm really trying to push the boundaries a little so we're innovating. There's a framework for this which is possibly typically better fit into rural counties because it's national. There are 48 across England. So there's the kind of DEFRA framework that gives us a methodology, but we are given a bit of a free hand. And typically, if you went to Shropshire or Buckinghamshire, there'll be all these lovely principles about linking woodlands and wetlands and whatever. We've got different challenges here around accessible green space. Climate adaptation is so critical. And we know the communities that are going to get hit first and are going to get hit hardest. And I think this gives us an opportunity to to look at this spatial strategy in a slightly different way to incorporate biodiversity and nature-based solutions that might not be absolutely brilliant for species, habitats, that kind of thing that is so important in those other counties, but it's really important for the other services they provide for people, for communities. So that's definitely a really good driver. And when we start to look at how this fits in terms of the planning system and with the other programs we've got with Nature Finance, actually, we can start to incentivize through this how BNG gets delivered in certain areas. So if it's in a strategic area, BNG scores 15% better. So that becomes an incentive for your developer to start delivering. It becomes an incentive for Habitat Bank projects to come forward. And then we can start to look at the piece of, if we're identifying strategies for certain outcomes, it then gives credibility to buyers and investors on that whole local investment in natural capital piece. So there's a lot of moving parts to this, and we're trying to make it bespoke to the West Midlands. So that's really important to me and the team.
I think it's extremely important, you know, across the combined authority area, the one area that is landlocked and lack the amount of green spaces, the other two, it's ours. And but I'm saying we need to really drill down.
Thank you, Chair. It's good to be here in person because the meetings that I've attended previously I've done on Teams, but for those who don't know, my name's Craig Collingswood. I'm councillor in Wolverhampton. Yeah, it was a really interesting presentation, and I appreciate some of the slides you did. What I liked was the heat map, because of course my eyes immediately go to Wolverhampton and can see where the risks are, and I'm looking around the city to see where's most vulnerable. So I like that. What I would say is, picking up on what my colleagues have said, sort of cost implications going forward. I mean, particularly in local governments, we've got councillors here from Birmingham and Samuel and myself. So, you know, we're acutely aware of finances at the moment. I'm just wondering about the financing of the scheme going forward. I think the timeline went through to another 12 months. So I think it went to, was it March 2025?
Yes.
Yeah. So we're looking over the next 12-month period. So I'd just like to know a little bit more about the financing of the scheme, and also a little bit more, if you don't mind, about the science behind the scheme as well. Because one of the things that was mentioned by yourself and your colleague, you mentioned about species. I just wonder where you get that information from, sort of thing, because if we're sort of encouraging species that's been, you know, that's vulnerable, how do we know? How are you sourcing that information? I'm just interested out of curiosity. Thank you.
Absolutely. Especially on the financing, I might also let Mike comment on the financing aspect in terms of going forward past March 2025. So we are funded to carry out the first iteration of the LNRS, which will be that first strategy that appears with a habitat map and our priorities, and that will be published in March 2025. There's no funding provided beyond March 2025. From there, we expect it will be in a sort of operational phase where it's a piece of work that everybody is using in order to guide their own operations. When a review period comes in, yeah, at some point we will be told it must be reviewed. We have no idea what the funding, as I understand it, what the funding will be at that point. That's quite far down the line. We just have the funding to deliver that first piece of strategy, which is going to.
Yeah. So with regard to that funding, we did get funds, as all responsible authorities did, for the delivery piece, and that's about resource. It's about the procurement of data acquisition and those kind of services around it. What we do appreciate, and we do talk to your officers that are relevant to this quite regularly, we want to make it as least impacting and as efficient as we can do. So we really do respect their time. What is really interesting from the feedback I get from the Mountain of England is that this is very much a start of a journey of a strategy that will be a rolling process. So whatever we produce in 12 months' time isn't the end. And I think what it will do, and DEFRA are very clear that this aligned with spending review. Who knows when that will be? But at the moment, they're trying to align it with spending review so that all the national strategies come on stream and we have priorities and areas where we should be taking action, and it can build into those kind of funding strategies at the national level. And it also ties into the nature finance work that's going on. So there is a bigger picture. Whether it all interweaves at the end is a different matter, but that's what we're working towards. Sorry, you asked a question about data and evidence. So we have to go with the best evidence we've got. So there are record centres that receive, and they're generally voluntary records. So there's evidence we can draw from that and national networks. And we will be drawing upon regional expertise in task and finish groups. So we have to go with the best evidence we've got. But as we've touched on earlier, actually some of the issues are less about rare species, because we're quite grey as a region, and more about the other challenges we face. And I think if we can address some of those other challenges around people, green space, climate adaptation, actually we will deliver a lot of the nature recovery as a consequence of that. So it's kind of the reverse that might be happening in Dorset or Devon, where they're very focused on chetty warblers or whatever, So I think we will have positives by a slightly different route.
It's interesting. Do you work with local universities in terms of gathering that data?
So the data tends to sit within what they call the record centres, which are typically at a kind of county administrative level. So yes, we've got two. So we've got Eco Record, which is Birmingham and the Black Country, and we've got Warwickshire. And thankfully, they do talk, they do overlap. What we do have to do is we have to make sure that data is consistent, because we can't have a strong set here and a weak set there. So we need to make sure we're picking the appropriate data set to serve the whole region.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from colleagues? It's been a really helpful and useful presentation. Thank you. So in terms of the reporting back to the board, obviously moving into the baselining and the stakeholder engagement piece, is the intention to bring the sort of draft reports back, and then we'll have some further discussion at that point?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. So with that, the recommendations are set out on the front of the report. So we're happy to agree those.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That takes us on to the local area energy planning and the planning regional infrastructure in a digital environment project update. That's a mouthful. I think it's Cheryl and Kate are taking us through this one.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Let me just put my slides on. Is that working for everybody?
Yep.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'm Cheryl Howes, Director of Energy Capital at the West Midlands Combined Authority. Thanks very much for giving us the chance to speak to you about this. So we've got 3 items from the Energy Capital team, and you'll hear from various members of my team. I'll do the first one, then the next items will be covered by Kate and George. So yes, local area energy planning and Project Pride. So hopefully the board paper was fairly self-explanatory, but this is really to give you some visibility of what's coming up, opportunities to influence and shape investment going forward. So in particular, what we wanted to do was draw your attention to the work of the Local Area Energy Plan Coordination Group, which I will explain in a bit more detail. Help make sure that you understand the approach that we're taking to local area energy planning in the West Midlands, and get your views on that. And then make sure that you're aware of an opportunity coming up through a consultation that Ofgem are putting forward about how regional energy strategic planning takes place going forward and what our role might be in that. So I will run through quickly the contents of the paper. So just to set the context, this work is funded externally at the moment. So Project Pride is an external project that's funded through Ofgem and the Strategic Innovation Fund, and it's given us an opportunity to kind of delve into this particular space. So as a result, we're taking quite an innovative approach because it's innovation funding, and we're working with the energy networks to make sure that we can come up with a good mechanism that works for them and us, and hopefully that they can pay for as much of it as possible. And we can be prepared for these regional energy strategic plans that will be developed going forward. So part of the project that we've established links back to some of the work we've been doing for some time, thinking about governance and how decisions are made. So essentially, there's two parts to the project. There's a data part and an information part, and then a kind of decision-making part. So this is the structure that we've set up, essentially saying, how do you, as the leaders responsible for energy within the Combined Authority, get the information that you need to be able to support decisions going forward? And where does that information come from? How does everybody participate in that? And then the new element is, how do we then feed that into this process of regional energy strategic planning that's going to take place in another acronym called the National Energy Systems Operator, which is a new body that's been set up. So it's part of National Grid, but it's a wholly owned public body. So this is a new body that's going to take responsibility for this regional energy planning across the whole of the country. So this is the governance structure that we established quite a while ago. We brought it to you when we were changing our the governance structure of Energy Capital. You'll see that we play an important role in sort of bringing that information together, but what we needed to do is make sure that we were bringing together all the different areas that affect energy planning, because as you all well know, energy affects pretty much everything. So we need to make sure that all of the elements are being brought together. In terms of the Local Area Energy Plan Coordination Group, the particular role that they have is thinking about how the West Midlands can ensure that it's effectively bringing together local area energy planning in the region and feeding that into this new role that the NESO are going to undertake. So it's open to our constituent and our non-constituent authorities, and the group has met a few times now. We've also got sub-working groups who've have been set up to work on specific elements where we want to dig down into specific issues like heat networks, which you'll hear a little bit more about from Kate later. The purpose of this approach that we're trying to take in the West Midlands is to make it cost effective, and building on the issues that you've already raised about resourcing, try and make it as easy for local authorities to participate as possible. But not only that, try and provide some value back to them to make to essentially ensure that they are getting value in lots of different areas of their work, and that energy can support and underpin what they're doing. So we've essentially been working on a digital tool, a digital platform that brings together all the information about the energy system that we need to know, and we can start to see how that affects all of the other parts of our statutory responsibilities. So our spatial planning, our transport planning, and where we're going to be investing in retrofit, where we're going to be investing in other assets across the region, so linking to the investment zones and all of that geography. So bringing kind of energy into that to try and understand a little bit more about how energy affects all of those different aspects that we're as a region responsible for, either at local authority or combined authority level. The feedback from the group has been really interesting. They've really welcomed the onboarding onto this tool that we've been using, and found that it's a really good mechanism for engaging with all the different parties that need to be involved, but have definitely flagged the issue of resource and capacity, which we're very well aware of, hence trying to bring in some extra funding to drive this forward, and us needing to take this innovative approach to be able to access that funding, but also believing fundamentally that it's the right way to go. What we don't want to do is develop static plans that are no use to anybody once they've been published. What we need to definitely ensure that we can reduce risk going forward for investors, so that they know where investment should take place. But equally, we don't want a document that sits on the shelf that we have to pay a consultant every time we want to change something or look into something in a bit more detail. So the idea of the digital tool is that it allows us to question and check and see whether decisions are appropriate and what impact they will have. it also supports so many other aspects. So our local authority officers have been keen to highlight that the work that we've been doing so far is not only kind of helping them to engage people, but to understand and identify net zero project opportunities, to inform decision making in all their sort of statutory responsibilities, to provide data to develop the business cases to do funding bids, so that they can bring in additional resource into their local authorities, to bring together external stakeholders, to collaborate around optioneering. And then the important bit from the perspective of the project that we're working on is to influence investment by energy networks, because ultimately we need the electricity network in particular to be providing the capacity for our economic growth and decarbonisation objectives. So just feeding into this bigger question of regional energy strategic planning and what that is, ultimately Ofgem have been driving this process. It's something that they consulted on last year. We've been working really closely with them, feeding in all the evidence from our Regional Energy System Operator project that helped drive this forward. They're currently in their detailed design phase, so they're working out all the details of what this could look like, and they will be going out to consultation in the summer. And that's really what we're flagging, that in the summer we will need to be, as a region, feeding into the consultation and making sure that whatever is proposed in that consultation is something that we're happy with, because Ofgem will then make a decision after the consultation process, and then it will be happening. So that's the way that this will work. Essentially, as I said, the West Midlands is part of a whole national programme. The region that the West Midlands falls into is a whole Midlands region at the moment, so that's up for consultation, and we're participating in some workshops next week to basically get some views from participants in the region as to whether they think it should be a smaller geography, which I think we are definitely going to be advocating. Again, we've highlighted that there needs to be political engagement on this, because ultimately they are looking for democratic accountability in this process, and for that to take place we obviously need our political leaders to be party to that, and it's been agreed that that will take place after the election, the local elections and the regional elections, so that there's an opportunity to have long-term engagement in what this new regional energy strategic planning process looks like. But in the meantime, we've been doing a lot of officer engagement, pretty much two days a week of engagement with Ofgem to shape this and make sure it works for the West Midlands. So I'm very happy to take any questions on this, because I know that it's a new subject to many, but essentially what we're trying to do is make sure that we are ready to feed into this planning process so that we get our needs met. We can ensure that the electricity and the gas networks going forward are suitable to allow our economic growth objectives, suitable to allow our decarbonisation objectives, and that we can reduce risk so that investors can come in and know where to invest in things like heat networks, which we'll hear about more in a minute, whilst reducing the cost burden and the requirement on local authorities, because it's very much considered that this will work effectively if we've all got local energy plans, but at the moment government hasn't decided whether they're going to fund those, so we need to find a really cost-effective process that minimises the impact on our offices, but also adds as much value as we can to helping them undertake their other roles that they have to undertake that this links to. So I will stop there and welcome any questions.
Thank you. Yes.
Thanks very much, Cheryl. For everyone's information, my name is Matthew Rhodes. I'm here representing the Energy Capital Board and the Black Country Industrial Cluster. And I'm a little bit of a dinosaur because I'm involved because of my work with the LEP. I was on the LEP board some time ago, but they know more. Anyway, 4 very straightforward questions, Cheryl. The industrial view, you talk about economic growth there, and that's absolutely the purpose of this, and that's important. That's what creates jobs. How are you making sure that the industrial view is actually captured in all that planning process? Because I think that's pretty critical. So that was the first question. The second question is, where are National Grid and Distribution on this project? Because I'm sure that
May I ask that we do one at a time, because I'll forget them even if I write them down. Is that all right?
Yeah, so let's do industrial first. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, certainly. In terms of industrial, we've been engaging with Ofgem on this. They are very keen to engage directly with the industrial clusters, but we've also highlighted the need for engagement with industry more widely that aren't necessarily clustered in specific geographies. So you'll have seen in the governance slide that we've got the industrial decarbonisation group, which is going to be represented through Faye and the team in the Black Country. And that will be the route through which we will ensure that we're bringing that voice to the table. In terms of how we actually bring data and information, that's something that's being worked through at the moment. So there is no agreed mechanism for doing that. And obviously a lot of that information is commercially confidential. And so trying to find ways of bringing that into the discussions is challenging. But again, the digital tool provides quite a useful mechanism for that. So it essentially allows us to put information into the tool that can be anonymized and allow a discussion around it, but without sort of specifically targeting individual businesses that don't want their information shared.
Okay, that's helpful. I guess the point to emphasise, it's not just the Black Country, it's the whole West Midlands. We do need to include everybody. And this is a national issue for me. It's a national problem that's a really weak voice. Local authorities, without being too critical, but are relatively weak historically in capturing that data. So it's really important.
Yeah, Ofgem have specifically identified that the NESO does need to engage directly with industry. Okay. And not rely on local authorities.
So second question was National Grid's, they're the sponsors of this project, through the SIF programme, National Grid Electricity Distribution. What's their attitude on the funding of the next stage? Because there's a note in the paper that there's £8 million, but so that sounds very specific, because I'm aware that it's actually as much as you need, isn't it?
The next round is up to 8 million that you can apply for. So the challenge is to make sure, because we're having to get innovation funding into this, is to make sure that National Grid see the benefit to them as a network, because that's where the funding is designed to find efficiencies within network planning. So we are trying to highlight the benefits of this approach, and we found that really easy to do, actually. So all the engagement we've had with other places that have also considered this sort of approach, there's a real push for a digital approach to local energy planning. There is a real challenge to Ofgem about whether the DNOs are actually, so distribution network operators are actually planning effectively at the moment or not, and how we can make that better. The actual cost benefit analysis for National Grid will be the key thing that drives whether they put an application in for the next round. Obviously, we're encouraging them to. The challenge also is from a resourcing point of view for our local authorities, because we know that we need money and support into the local authorities, and this isn't really it's not designed for that. So, essentially we still need to be looking for other sources of funding, and we're still lobbying government hard on trying to get to a position where we've got local authority capacity building funding, which we're very much aware that we need. But this is an efficiency mechanism. We're trying to argue essentially it's an efficiency mechanism for both the network operator and local authorities to get to a good place.
Yeah, I can't emphasise it. I think it's really important for this region that is funded, because it's just such a weak relationship. But industry is a big part of the Black Country. It's a big part of Birmingham and this region. We need to have a way of getting that conversation working. And local authorities are quite weak industrially, if you like. Network companies are also quite weak industrially, in my experience.
There was a really interesting case study in Wales where there's been huge value from that approach, working directly with industry and using the digital approach. So we are picking up on that with Scottish Power Electricity Networks and National Grid Electricity Distribution, and seeing what we can draw from that.
More quick questions. So you said very early on trying to make them pay for it. I was just going to make the point that them paying for it is us paying for it, because they just pass the cost back on to the customers. And in particular, so the question really is, are you doing anything about making sure the allocation of costs to the economy is fair? In other words, that it's not all just put on industry because it's easy, and then we have the kind of crisis we had last year. and puts business out, it destroys jobs in this region. So that was one. I'm going to do the other one as well because my other question was smaller geography. I can see the political advantage of marrying the West Midlands geography with the regional planning thing, but also there's also an energy advantage for this region, I think, possibly in being married with the. I mean, I wouldn't ever believe I'd hear myself saying this, the East Midlands, because they've got a lot of energy, they've got a lot of renewable energy, they've got the coastline, they could give us that energy, and looking at the two together has some virtues.
Yeah, if I take that one first. So when it comes to the democratic accountability element of the Regional Energy Strategic Plan, then I think that's where we are arguing that it needs to be representative of the local government structures that already exist, and so we're trying very hard to make sure that is considered. But I think where we will land, and this obviously I'm putting this out in a public forum, but I think it will be that it's likely that there is a Midlands region, and there'll be two RESPs within that Midlands region that essentially do work together, but they're democratically separate, but they are very much aligned when it comes to opportunity. Because I absolutely agree, there are you can't just work within your own boundaries. You need to look beyond, and we're aware of that for not just the East and West Midlands, but also our other hinterlands. In terms of allocation of costs, yeah, this is a big issue. It's a big issue for Ofgem, essentially, in terms of our view is that it shouldn't be necessarily the taxpayer that pays for this. It does need to also, to some extent, come through the bill payer. That is happening out of our control, essentially. But what we are trying to say here is it's in the interest of the networks to get good information, to be investing in the right places at the right time, because that's the cost-effective solution that we need. So the more information we can bring and the better engagement that we can have, the more likely we're going to get those good investments, and we're not going to have stranded assets and wasted investments. So we're working with Ofgem on it, but it's not a simple solution, as you well know.
Yeah, but it's just for the board's benefit, the industrial energy costs in England and the West Midlands are 50 to 90% higher than the rest of the world. So we've been exporting energy intense jobs like foundries and forges and car factories to the rest of the world for the last 30 years. And part of the reason is because Ofgem, you understand why, but they tend to weight extra costs for energy infrastructure on industrial customers rather than taxpayers, because taxpayers vote, and we understand that, but that's the underlying issue here that we're trying to address. Peter.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, in terms of the project as a whole, I know our officers are starting to make use of the mapping tool in particular, and they're trying to see how it might support them with future plans for carbon technologies. They particularly want to see whether it will help with projects like electrical vehicle charging, I think. And they've passed the information on to the housing and planning colleagues as well to see how it might assist them. They have had some difficulties, I believe, in actually accessing the tool and also running reports, and I believe you are trying to assist with that, and the software developers are also quite helpful, which is a comment I'd like to make back. In terms of questions, there's a couple. How's the political engagement going to take place post-May? How do you intend to carry that out? We need, as Matthew's pointed out, we need the engagement of businesses in particular. I'm wondering whether we should be looking for energy champions among our business ambassadors and what have you. One last thing, and that's in relation to the major energy companies. Should we be squeezing some social value from them? Bearing in mind what Matthew has just mentioned, we're trying to squeeze a quart out of a pint pot with each of these reports. In other words, it's falling back on the local authorities. We're trying to get more and more work carried out from officers who are already pressurised with their own jobs back at the ranch. And I really think, you know, the resource could come from those energy businesses. And maybe they should be, instead of doing small little social value things here and there, amass the whole money together and resource us, helping them, because they want us to have energy maps. They want us to tell them where their new grids need to be laid down and how they need to develop. Let them help us by bringing some social value back when it needs to be.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I think that's a great point. So one of the benefits we have of the Energy Capital Partnership being a slightly different model to other regions is that we have the ability to work closely with the private sector, and they are all very keen to participate. So I think your point about social value is a really interesting one. We've been exploring that very closely with our strategic partners, so with SSE, who have kind of made a commitment to the region, and there seem to be some opportunities there. I think you're right, we should take that out to the wider partnership and see what response we can get. So I'll take that away. Thank you. In terms of your question about political engagement post-May, so we haven't agreed that process yet. Be very interested to hear your views as to how we might be able to do that appropriately. As I said, the Ofgem consultation will come out in the summer, and there's an opportunity then to shape that. That is the last opportunity. We really need to make sure that we shape it then. So from our point of view, it's working between now and then to ensure that this governance structure is effective, ensure that we've got the right information flowing through to the politicians, and then being able to get them engaged in the actual information that Ofgem puts out. I was going to ask whether there would be an appetite for essentially some kind of information exchange with particularly for political leaders in this space, because I know it's a new subject to many, and it's not something that's kind of part of your statutory training processes or anything like that. So there was a question really from me as to how you think we should resource up our politicians to be in a good place to be able to help contribute, obviously beyond the sort of standard governance processes we've got, and recognising we may need to obviously wait until after the elections before we do that. Otherwise, people might be investing without need. So yeah, but I do welcome views on that.
I've got Majid, Craig, and then Ed online. Majid.
Yeah, thank you, John. So Birmingham Council are very supportive of this programme, and I know they're actively participating both the coordination and the heat subgroup, but Birmingham is not one of the initial cohort authorities with access to local area energy planning. Whilst we are aware the combined authority is seeking additional funding to support all, we have substantial development in the city in coming years, so we would benefit extremely from a local area action plan against which to reference and identify constraints and opportunities. As such, we are very keen to seek funding to help accelerate the timetable for the rollout in Birmingham.
Fabulous, yes. As with all these funding pots, the pots are small, and the reason why Birmingham wasn't included to start with was because of the size. So it was essentially have taken all the money in one go. But yeah, we are very keen because obviously Birmingham is the sort of centre anchor to a lot of the opportunities that we'll be looking at. So yeah, I'm very happy to work with your officers to ensure that we're looking at all potential opportunities for funding, not just the one that we have in train.
Great. Craig.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair, for the presentation. And similar to my colleague in Sandwell, the feedback from officers in Wolverhampton on the tool has been positive. So thanks for that. My sort of question is around as the combined authority, the different areas within the combined authority have got different levels of deprivation. And I just wondered if within the tool there's a sort of there's a way of gathering data sort of from a socio-economic perspective to sort of identify at-risk locations to see where there are areas of more vulnerability and more vulnerable communities where action can be targeted. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I don't know whether you want to say a little bit more about this because you've probably been engaged more directly with the use of the tool.
So the tool is essentially agnostic and can take data across a number, and the whole idea is to be able to overlay the energy system data with much wider data that allows us to kind of gather that insight. So things like transport planning data, natural capital, as we've already covered in this meeting. But yes, as you say, things like indices of multiple deprivation are really, really helpful to help us target. And one of the use cases that have come out really strongly is around existing funding pots and how difficult it is to try and target and prioritise those when the bands are very narrow as to where you can target that funding. As in future, we're hoping to widen those bands, but for now, one of the immediate kind of use cases for the tool is to say, actually, can we use that to layer up exactly that data that you're referring to so that we can make those processes a bit more efficient? So we're seeing the value at local authority in terms of kind of officers utilising the tool, and the co-benefit that we get with that is because NGED are the sponsor of this, and ultimately what they're looking to get out of it is better oversight of what projects are coming forward. It's a natural mechanism then to say, well, we could design projects in the tool, and then NGED and other in the kind of energy planning space will essentially be able to see what's coming forward and what needs to be kind of prioritised in terms of their investment as well. So I think it works both ways. Ed?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just really wanted to offer a general reflection. I think Cheryl covered the detail in relation to sort of the local authority capacity issues and challenges around that. But just to make a general point, both about the first item on local nature recovery strategies and this one, which I think it's a really good model for the way in which we can do certain things at a regional tier, but we then work really closely with local authority officers at the local tier, and trying to get the balance right about where the right levels of capacity are at each of those two tiers is really the trick. But my sense is that from both items we are getting that balance about right, and it does feel as though the combined authority is adding value to the work that local authority officers are doing. But I just wanted to make the general point, because I think these are two case studies where there may be other aspects of work both in the energy and environment sphere, but thinking more broadly into sort of public service reform and so on, where actually that same conversation could happen in a very constructive way.
Okay, anybody else want to come in on this item? I think it's been a very useful discussion, and clearly something that we'll be returning to. Also, welcome the purely parochially the comments around engaging with Birmingham as well. So that's very helpful. The recommendations are set out on page 19, 1 to 3. We're happy to agree those. Excellent. So that takes us on then to the heat networking zoning consultation update.
Sarah, you, I think, to put the slide back up on the screen.
Yeah, give me one moment.
Okay, so thanks everyone. Just by introduction for me, so I'm Kate Ashworth. I'm Energy Infrastructure Lead, part of the Energy Capital team, and I'm going to be taking you through the heat network zoning and consultation response item on this. And the next slide, please. So in terms of the ask of this group, really I want you to kind of understand, acknowledge heat network zoning as a national programme that's coming forward, but what our response is to that, and then to endorse the kind of proposed next steps in terms of how we're going to go forward and enable and support the kind of best outcomes from that national programme. And I will say that the approach that we're taking is particularly proactive. So this is a thing that's coming forward at a national level, but as a region, we've been lauded for actually our level of kind of cohesion and kind of bringing everyone kind of into a room to have these kind of discussions right at the start of this process. So it gives us the maximum possible opportunity to kind of shape and make sure we're getting the best out of this programme. So I'm very pleased to be able to bring this discussion to you, and great thanks to your officers for the kind of engagement through that to help us kind of have those substantive discussions. Can I have the next slide, please? So just by way of context, so heat networks is a foundational piece of how we're going to achieve our decarbonisation journey in the UK. It's got cross-party support and as a way of meeting those targets. Essentially, there are some statistics that I'm presenting on screen around kind of how, in terms of the kind of energy and energy bills. But the one I really wanted to highlight was that through the government's strategy, we need to get to 18% of heat demand connected to a heat network by 2050. At the moment, in the West Midlands, that's less than 1% of heat demand. So we've got a long way to go before at the levels where we need to get to in terms of achieving that pillar, essentially. This is both this is a new way for the West Midlands to achieve this, but it's not a new technology. It's very, very common, particularly on the continent, where kind of municipal heating schemes are much more commonplace. But I think I also wanted to emphasise there's an economic opportunity here, because this sort of drive will essentially bring a lot of investment into the region. So nationally, we're looking at kind of 60 to 80 billion. And the low carbon sector is actually the fastest growing economic sector in the West Midlands. So we're looking at potentially 12 billion to the regional economy from the kind of wider low carbon sector. So you can see there's significant investment that we can capture, there's significant jobs and kind of economic benefit that we can bring through this. But we need to do it right, because ultimately the vast majority of that 60 to 80 billion will be private investment, and we need to make sure that we give ourselves as a region the levers to make sure that we're getting the co-benefits out of that investment, and that investment isn't just taken out of the region again. Next slide, please, Cheryl. So in terms of what is on the table, the reason why we're having this conversation around heat network zoning in the first place is because whilst we have the private investors ready to go and we have investors signed off in terms of the amount that they want to bring into the region, there are significant barriers in terms of their investment. And a lot of that is around uncertainty. It's uncertainty around whether by making these very large scale investments, they can get the customers that they need to take the heat to replenish that business model. So the government have recognised this, and their means to try and overcome that and bring certainty into that industry is to bring forward heat network zoning as a concept. And this was enshrined in the Energy Act last year. So this allows them to start bringing this through. And essentially what this means is that within a designated heat network zone, there will be certain buildings, certain customers that will be mandated to connect to that within a specific timescale. That takes away the uncertainty for a heat network developer, because they know if they build the network that they will have guaranteed customers at the end of it. Now, at the moment, this is all up. We're part of a consultation phase at the moment. So which buildings will be mandated to connect isn't set in stone yet. But it's proposed to be new buildings, so where there are new developments, it's much, much easier and cheaper for them to kind of put the infrastructure in at the start. It's primarily non-domestic buildings above a certain size, but it's worth mentioning that public sector buildings could well be captured in that. So things like council houses and other kind of public sector assets could well be within the realms of this. And it's also potentially residential buildings that are already communally heated. So if you're in a building that already has a communal heating supply, that could be mandated to connect to a much larger scheme, which in fact should help in terms of energy resilience, in terms of lowering bills for everyone. But it's worth kind of noting what that looks like on the table. So in terms of the kind of heat network, the more of the detail of the heat network proposal, I wasn't planning to take us through all this. The only thing that I really want to bring out through this slide in terms of understanding what heat networks is going to be for us in terms of the public sector, it's less of a role and more of a series of processes that we will need to go through. And so the starting of the process is essentially identifying the zone, and there will be tools to help us to do that. So there's a model that kind of spits out a kind of a regional boundary, and it says we think that this might be, and it's an area of kind of heat density essentially. So the likely areas are going to be city centres. They're going to be kind of where we have a lot of heat demand in a small area. But there will be a need for kind of local refinement of that zone, and that's going to be a really, really important process that we'll have to go through. And then there is a bit about zone delivery. So who actually invests in this zone? Who do we want to partner with to bring forward these zones? How do we through those contractual relationships, ensure that we're getting the co-benefit, we're getting fair heat price, we're getting the decarbonisation objectives, that is the kind of starting point of this, but we're also getting the ability to ensure that those zones expand and bring the maximum benefits to the widest possible area. So how do we manage that process? And then there is a third pillar around zone operation. So how do we enforce that zone? How do we make sure that those who are mandated to connect actually do so? And that is a particularly kind of important kind of local issue. So what we've been doing as a officer group, and we've convened actually a subgroup of the local area energy planning group that was mentioned earlier. We've convened a subgroup of that, and it's huge thanks to the level of engagement to kind of bring forward as actually the practical implications of this. What does this look like on the ground? And we've come up with a few essentially kind of clarifications, making sure that through that zoning consultation, we're very clear on kind of what our local needs are through this process. A clear one that came out time and time again was around resourcing. We've mentioned it already in terms of capacity building for local area energy planning itself. We recognise that a lot of these responsibilities will sit at local level. There needs to be resourcing. Now, there is some resourcing proposed, but we don't think it's sufficient, because we don't think that is that really those practical implications have been fully kind of understood and realised through that. So that there was a lot of pushback through that, I would say. The other thing that came through quite strongly was around kind of the coordinator zones and expertise required. And actually, this is not just within local authorities or combined authorities. This is a national kind of skills shortage that we have in this space already, that we're going to quite quickly have to upskill and build capacity in that area. The timescales are also pretty challenging. So it is envisaged that this this legislation will be in place by 2025, and the first of these schemes will be under construction by the end of 2025. So this is something that we, then there is an ambitious timescale put forward as to how we would achieve this and upskill ourselves to and up resource to get to this space, essentially. So that is challenging, and there are also some things in the consultations around things like how long those kind of local consultations around things like zone refinements, how long those are open for, how long it would take for officers to return on those. So we've spent a bit of time developing kind of specific arguments around that. And lastly, the other kind of key theme that came forward was around communication and engagement needs. So it was we think that there is a requirement for a national communications plan on this. We know that we're not the only area. We're probably ones that have thought about it, and one of the most kind of intensive processes. But this will be a national plan, and actually we don't feel that there's very much knowledge in industry about this. So there does need to be some national communication plans. But we also need to think about our own communication, how we bring stakeholders through this. So what would those look like? Again, it comes back to resources and how we're going to achieve that, essentially, and how we're going to do that in a coordinated way. So my last slide then is around kind of next steps. So we have, through that officer group, responded to the consultation, and a very detailed consultation response was put back. And again, we were thanked for that response. We will continue to work with those local officer partners through that group to look at disaggregating that zone and zone coordinator roles, so to see where it should best sit, where we can get efficiencies by working together, by sharing best practice, but also understand the kind of local constraints and nuances that will need to go through that process. We also obviously want to make sure it's aligned fully with the local area energy planning process that we've already spoken about today. So in that, we have recognised a need to develop a programme that is supportive and enabling of that. And we have pulled some resources, short-term resources in response. So we have Ramble working with us and Wolfrana Consulting to essentially help us to kind of come up with some recommendations on what that future heat programme would look like. And that resource has also been made available to our local authority officers on a one-to-one basis to help them with kind of through this decision-making process. So I think in terms of next steps, we really need to understand what the future looks like for us, recognising this is a big national policy shift, and then think about how do we support and enable, build that capacity, work within those timescales to achieve the best possible outcome through this.
Thank you. Just one question. So how are you relating to existing initiatives? So, for example, I know there's a heat network in Birmingham, which was one of the country first, I think. Also Coventry and Sandwell have a plan. And those initiatives are all there. And there's quite a lot of tower blocks in Wolverhampton as well, which are, so how are you picking those up? And the other kind of repeat kind of topic in this area is waste to energy plants, which there are a handful in the, well, there's obviously, I don't know, 5 or 6 in the West Midlands. They are an underused resource for district heating, where because they're wasting a lot of heat, they're making electricity, but you could put that heat into nearby houses. So how are you picking up those two issues?
Okay, so absolutely, there are existing networks, and that's an interesting thing that came through the consultation around kind of incumbents. So if you have a developer already in the region, do they have the ability to expand and invest and achieve those outcomes? And the way that we are picking that up is we're working very closely with Birmingham, particularly on their advanced zoning pilot, which I'm committed to mention, but that is something that is supported directly by DESNZ and the HNDU team, where they're essentially being fast-tracked through that zoning pilot process, and we are bringing that expertise from helping Birmingham with their own kind of governance and understand the kind of the informed decision making that will need to take place in that, but we're also sharing that in terms of best practice through that LEAP Heat group, which will continue to stand to share with the rest of the region. So we're very much involved and embedded within the kind of that Birmingham programme. And I think the other point that you picked up about energy from waste is, and wider, I would say, is through that LEAP Heat group, we're also looking to support other potential opportunities. For example, we were in Wednesbury earlier last year thinking about potential kind of waste heat from Q Technologies, for example. So I'm working with our strategic partner, bringing them into the mix to try and find some of those commercial opportunities. We delivered a DPD in Walsall at the back of the start of this year, looking at the energy from waste plant there that is being brought forward by Encyclist. So essentially looking to kind of do the technical feasibility of what would that look like potentially, and that very much will build into that zoning, the zoning conversation. So we are very much working across the piece in this, but it's a transitionary period where we're trying to piece all these things together and make it greater than the sum of its parts.
Andrew?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just to confirm, Birmingham has been working closely with the Combined Authority on the zoning consultation and also welcoming members of the Energy Capital team into the core project group, which you referenced, the Advanced Zoning Programme. Obviously, we're grateful to the officers for their time and input into that. We also submitted our own consultation, but we also did it jointly with the Combined Authority to show that key messages were emphasised across both submissions. The consultation is lacking in some detail, and you picked up on it, is around the pre-existing heat network that we have in the city, but we are seeking clarification on that around and some other key areas on the Advanced Zoning Programme. The Department of Energy, Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, has also indicated it's going to share the feedback before it's published in the public domain as well, so that will be interesting. And obviously we're going to keep regular contact with Energy Capital as well.
Lisa?
Well, can I ask how many coordinators we expect to see across the Combined Authority? Do we have an idea?
So essentially it's for us to decide where we want those roles and responsibilities of a heat network zoning coordinator role to sit. So are you asking in terms of resources? So how much additional resourcing would come with that?
No, but I'm thinking of all the projects that you see in the different areas. Do you see one zone coordinator?
So it's not entirely clear yet. Yeah. So when they went through the pilot process, some of the zones were enormous. So it included lots of Birmingham into a kind of big zone, but then it looked to break it down into different phases essentially. Yeah. So some phases would come earlier than others. Maybe some would work in parallel and then close together. There's a question mark about whether those would be brought forward by individual developers, or would you consider it one zone by one developer, or whether you break it into different developers? other zones seem quite small and they are brought forward by different consultants. So there is a question around kind of standardization of methodology, for example, to understand and get a kind of sense of consistency across some of these zones. I don't think I have a very clear answer for you at the moment, but we're working through that process to understand a bit more what it looks like.
There was one other point I wanted to make, and just on. Section 6, it's the next steps. The only thing I thought about those two paragraphs there is that they seem a bit loose and lack some key objectives and aims and timescales. I'm just wondering whether we could firm that up a bit.
Sure. No, I understand that. So I think we are waiting for, we're not waiting, we're moving proactively forward with a kind of transitional piece in the meantime and trying to refine our own thinking within that officer group. But we're also waiting for feedback on the consultation to understand, you know, as that gets refined and we're clearer as to kind of what that role will look like, what resources will come from that, then we can start to kind of piece those together. So I guess the next steps are to work collectively across the piece to kind of form this programme. But I'd be very happy to kind of bring that back to the group as and when we've got kind of firmer and clearer kind of recommendations to move forward, because it will move apace as well. So I'm very happy to do that.
Frank?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we've got an energy from waste plant in Wolverhampton, so I'd be very interested to hear more about how that things will link into these heat networks, and of course they've got a massive role to play in addressing fuel poverty and so on and so forth. I mean, there's a skills and technical knowledge shortage in the area, isn't there? Yeah. In this particular area, and I just wondered, you know, how is that being addressed, and is Energy Capital providing any assistance to local authorities for that technical expertise?
So absolutely, there's a couple of bits in there. So it's a known issue around skills and expertise and resourcing that kind of then would feed into that as well. There's some funding and training available through the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero itself. So we've been signposting through that, and where officers are able to join that and kind of get a kind of foundational level of understanding. There is also some innovation projects around some of the modelling aspects of this. So how do we model and utilise the zoning, you know, the identification of zoning itself, which there's some European funding in there potentially, which also we've been looking to signpost. But we do a lot through that LEAP group where we share these opportunities to kind of, you know, to upskill ourselves through that forum, and then also the kind of wider kind of training that may be available through that. But it's a known issue.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Anybody else want to come in? No, I think the response, the issues you've identified in the response to the consultation are absolutely the correct ones, and I think we'll probably see some other consultation responses that have been brought in, particularly the issue around resourcing. I mean, the one paragraph jumps out at me. The concerned current estimates do not represent a thorough examination of the activities required to carry out the role effectively or reflect the likely scale. Those of us have been around in local government a while. It won't be the first time that we've seen responsibilities passed on without a full understanding of the resources that accompanies it. So I think it's really important that we continue to push that point in addition with all the others. The recommendations are set out on page 25. Are we happy to agree that?
Great.
Thank you. That takes us on then to the Net Zero Accelerator progress update.
Thank you, Chair. Just have one slide here. It's a short verbal update on this, given that we had substantive discussion on this in December in eBoard then. But as a reminder, this is a programme funded by Department of Energy, £6.3 million, which was announced in November 2023. And the aims of the programme are to build out a pipeline of net zero neighbourhood demonstrators. We should be able to have one in every local authority, in addition to the one that Combined Authority is already funding in Dudley, and also to overcome some of the key barriers to investing in net zero projects, namely investor engagement, establishment of the regional fund and also the data infrastructure that's needed to support that. So mobilisation is well underway. Submitted a business case through the SAF process in January 2024. That was agreed at investment panel on Monday, and it will go to investment board on the 18th of March to sign off. We're in the process of agreeing the different project stage gates with government, but actually we're pressing ahead with mobilisation, hoping to have the first payment in place by April, but we're already underway with preparing for recruitment, procurement, and those sorts of things as well. I'm happy to take any questions, but
Any questions from colleagues on that? I think that's all pretty straightforward. Thank you. Okay, that then brings us, the only other item is date of the next meeting, which is down to be confirmed. So
Yep.
I'm assuming that's
Yeah, Craig, do you know when the dates for the following meetings?
Yeah,
Is that?
that's something that the governance services team are in the process of
Yeah.
looking into. So those dates will be circulated in due course shortly.
fine. Okay, I think that brings our business to a conclusion for today. So thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you. Just we'll be getting copies.
Thank you
very much.
No worries, that's my brief period of respite.